Welcome to Focus 24/7, our podcast series. For those in our network who have seen them before, you're used to seeing Lloyd, and we're now sharing it around the team moving forward, getting some different guests on. So you'll be seeing some new faces from Focus Cloud. So my name is Joel Kirkland. I've been in the Workday ecosystem for 18 months with Focus Cloud, and Focus Cloud was the first global recruitment organization to specialize solely in Workday. We've been going about 5 years now, and I lead a global team. So our guest today is Andy Robertson, Alpha Financial Software, and the title of the podcast is The Power of More Than One. So Andy, tell us a bit about yourself first off.
Good morning, Joel. So my background is, I guess, software implementation as a whole. I've been at Alpha for 20 years now. I joined as a fresh-faced graduate and learned about software development, but Alpha as a company has been developing and implementing software for finance companies for 30 years now. And I spent the first 15 years of my career working client side with large financial institutions, banks and manufacturers, helping them take the advantage of our platform. So developing that software, designing features and helping our clients use them. So implementing them and supporting them in their use. So that's my background, but then Alpha is a growing company, and one of the advantages that came my way 5 years ago was to move in-house and to head up our finance operations.
Okay.
So at the time we were a privately owned organization. So the finance operations was much smaller than it is now. We're a small team delivering a smaller set of financial reports. And so I guess that's where my interactions with Workday started, was back then about 5 years ago.
Okay, interesting. And so tell us about your journey with Workday. That's the sort of first topic. So why did you choose the platform?
So I would guess my plan when I moved into this internal role within finance was to give it 12 months to see how things panned out, because everything in finance happens at least once every 12 months. But then 9 months into that role, it got announced that we were going to IPO the company, which changed the landscape of everything. We needed to bring in a CFO to lead us through that transaction. And so in the first half of 2017, that's what we did. We started to build out the finance function, bringing in a financial controller at the same time. And between us, we saw through the successful IPO in June 2017. So a very intense project, very focused on that specific delivery of the IPO. But coming out of that was the realization of the reporting requirements that would be placed on the finance team on a regular basis, on a much more frequent basis, both internally within Alpha and externally to the market and investors. It won't come as a huge surprise to yourself or to many others that from a privately owned organization, we were heavily dependent on a small number of point solutions and a lot of manipulation within spreadsheets in order to generate the various views of data that we needed. Okay. So it was fairly shortly after the IPO that there was the realization that we needed a better platform on which to deliver that financial reporting.
Sure.
So it was in the second half of 2017 that we started looking for a system. And there was a number of key drivers that we were looking for. I guess one was the ability to standardize and systemize all of our core processes. So that's across the finance function, accounts payable, accounts receivable, banking, and financial reporting around consolidation, but also within HR, onboarding and terminating employees. And the hope we would then have is, off the back of having standardized those, we would then have something that would give us better insights and quicker reporting. So that was to improve the here and now of where we were at that point in time. But something that had been driven out of the IPO was the growth strategy of the company. And so we needed something internally to support that growth.
Yeah.
So that was the basis on which we were looking for a new system. Okay. And in fairly short order, we settled on Workday. It ticked those boxes from standardization, from reporting, and supporting a lot of the key requirements we had, most importantly across finance and HR.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key differentiators as well was around professional services. We are a big part of what we do at Alpha is delivery. We deliver complex projects to clients with a very talented workforce in that area. And so a big part of our revenue is based on billing people for time.
Sure.
So I think the Workday offering around being able to track time and bill for that time was really helped in our decision of seeing where the platform could take us beyond the core processes of finance and HR.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. So what did you do before you started your implementation to make sure that you were ready?
That's a very good question and takes me back to it was December 2017 and we started our implementation in January 2018. So to say there was a huge amount of preparation to prepare ourselves, I think it doesn't quite hit the mark. We were trying to move very quickly to catch up on demands that were already being placed on us.
Yep.
I think what set us up, though, for the implementation was what we did to try and get the right skill mix on the team. We're a medium-sized enterprise, so limited resources on what we can throw at a project of this size.
Yep.
And certainly when we looked at the scope of our phase one, there was that appreciation that we just wanted to put the foundations in place and we needed to put those in quickly. We didn't want to run before we could walk, to use a very well-worn phrase. And so we needed those core things in place. And so we needed someone with data skills to support the HR team to help improve the quality of the HR data that we were putting into the system.
Okay.
And then I think what I was able to bring to the project was what I'd learned on the initial 15 years of my career working on our implementation side. And so I was able to cover off roles around project management, understanding the financial moving parts that we had around accounts payable, accounts receivable, and existing systems, and then actually also bring the data manipulation that we needed to set up the data model and the opening balances within Workday. So having a couple of people who could work across roles really helped us, rather than relying on a pure project manager or a pure accounts payable subject matter expert, which would have involved a lot more people, which would have complicated the project.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So roll forward into implementation. How did you find it? How did it go?
In a word, quick. So that was one of the key drivers we had, and one of the, I guess, when we were planning the project with Workday, one of the pressures that was put on this is how quickly can we do this? So at the time, Workday was bringing their launch methodology into EMEA. It's something that they'd worked successfully with in the US. But at the time, I believe we were the first full platform, so financials and HCM launch client in EMEA.
Okay.
But it suited our purpose. We were looking to standardize core processes. So taking a best practice out of the box solution worked for us, and then we would have to justify why we were any different, because bringing people into the company, paying suppliers, raising an invoice, there's not a huge amount of specialism that we needed.
Sure.
So as I said, we followed the launch methodology in the first half of 2018. So we started in January, and within 5 months, we went live with global HCM. So every employee in the company had a profile on the system with their core personal data and compensation data. So our workforce is primarily focused in the UK, but we have a significantly sized subsidiary in the US, and we also have people dotted around Europe, and we have a number of people down in Asia Pac, so Australia and New Zealand. So quite diverse from a location point of view.
Yeah.
And then a month later, we went live with UK financials. So we ran both in parallel, and that UK financials delivered also global consolidations. So while some of the subsidiaries were still on their local ledger system, we were still bringing them into in on a monthly basis. So yeah, it was a very swift implementation. At the time, our implementation partner was Workday. So that was, I believe, as a result of us being one of the first clients to use the launch methodology in EMEA, they were keen to help us embed that process. And looking back, and this is borne out in a number of subsequent projects we've run, is that for the first few phases of that project, so through the modeling and the architect and the configuring and prototyping phases, the implementation partner is very much taking the lead and guiding you through that. So we just had to ensure that we could keep up with them. And that was something we were able to do because we had a good idea of what the company was structured like. We knew who our entities were. We were fairly, from a finance function, we were fairly centralized in the UK. So the people I needed to speak to when we were based in an office were literally across the desk from me. Yep. So we could make decisions very quickly and build out that data model, which has stood the test of time fairly quickly. I think the most challenging area is when the responsibility is passed to you to test the software. Despite as an organization having run huge implementation projects and supported our clients with vast test teams, it's not something we have a huge amount of experience of running internally on a different kind of scale as well. We had a small team who had business as usual responsibilities that they had to deal with. So if it was payroll, people had to get paid. And so we had to fit in around that. So I guess that was the one area of the schedule that flexed slightly compared to the original launch plan. Because I think the original launch plan was that we would be tested within 3 weeks. Okay. And I think we ended up rolling out probably over a couple of months, because actually what we did is we blended testing with user training, because it was only a small group of people. Sure. And actually what we found more useful and more practical was doing testing on a very regular basis, so a small amount every day, rather than a real heavy focus of let's lock everyone in a room for 2 weeks and they're not allowed out till they've finished all their testing. But that worked really well, because actually that gave us the time to address any queries that came up during the testing, so that it'd be ready for the next time that they tested. Yeah. And we could make those small incremental changes to the processes as we worked through them. Okay. So yeah, it was, I think the other thing that advantaged us was that although every employee had a profile and we were putting in place something to support the financials for the whole company, actually a lot of what we do is at the time was very centralized, so the impact was lessened on the broader company. Yeah. The fact that someone had a profile didn't really impact them a huge amount, because it contained the information that they knew about themselves already, and we weren't asking for a huge amount of engagement at that point in time. Yeah. And so we could really focus on ensuring that the finance team and the HR team understood what they had in front of them. And especially on the finance point of view, we really focused on ensuring that we could get the transactions into the system, because we wanted to make sure that in the first month we would be able to pay suppliers and we would be able to invoice our customers. And those are the real key drivers to get ready for that go live.
Okay. How did you manage the partner interface? So you mentioned about using Workday, and did you use any other partners along the way as well?
Not for that initial implementation. So we had a very good working relationship with Workday. I mean, they were obviously very motivated to have a successful launch project across finance and HCM as well. I think something that worked for us at the time was the fact that they were headquartered just across the road from us, and so we could do a lot of face-to-face meetings, which at the time worked very efficiently for us. We've had to adapt how we do that now, obviously, like a lot of other people, but I think the small focus team really helped us, and they specialised in a few key areas. So we had a lead for HCM, and we had two leads within the finance space, one around accounts payable and banking, the other around the accounts receivable side. But it was a very successful relationship, and the project delivered on time.
Okay. Excellent. And then moving on to resources and change management. Be good to get a bit of feedback for you on kind of how you built your team up, and then the internal change process when you take on a platform like Workday?
Yeah, so I think going through the implementation, I mean, one of the key things that I look back on is it was just incredibly tight. We were a small team and we were running business as usual as well as an implementation project. So whilst I said at the outset that we benefited from having the ability to wear multiple hats and take on different roles within the project, because it wasn't quite big enough for those things to be full-time roles, it did mean we ended up being incredibly stretched at key points in the project. So a bit more breathing space would have been nice going through that. Coming out of it, I think what we benefited from is we had identified that we needed someone to focus on the HR data, to work with the HR team to understand the data that they had and how that would be built into Workday. And what that role quickly came for us was our report writer. Yeah. So Workday does come with a huge suite of standard reports, but I believe that the real value you get from it is when you can develop your own custom reports. So that you can get the information you need in a structure that suits you, that is common to you, and just minimizing the number of clicks you need to get to the view you're looking for. Okay. And so that was one role that developed internally quite early on for us, was getting someone up to speed with the report writing. And then that role kind of grew naturally to support the other aspects around understanding the security and the business processes. So to me, it became apparent fairly early on that we would need a minimum of like a full-time person who understood the platform and how to, one, configure it. Yeah. All of a sudden, we had all of our HR data in a cloud platform, which was the same platform that we were using financials. And so we really need to understand the security model within that, what visibility that allowed people at different levels, and then how to get that information out and share it with people. So that's something that we've been working on continuously since go live, and there's a definite requirement to have that skill set in the team. I think the next thing in terms of where we moved to was an implementation partner. So Workday, having got us live, then handed us off, as was always the plan, but it still came as a surprise to me, saying, you can't help me anymore. So yes, we can help you, but the way that they're set up is that they expect you for future phases to move on and work with an implementation partner. So that was something that we had to learn how to do. So we had to go out and engage with suppliers and go through a process of working out who we wanted to work with. And we've worked with a couple of partners now. So we've worked with Kainos and we've worked with PwC. Both of them provided good quality service on those implementations that we were looking to work on with them at those various times.
Sure.
And so that was something we had to discover, and how do we engage with those people? How do we give them access to our system? What terms do we want to work on with them for as well? So that is a model that we're now evolving, because the next thing that we've done is we realized that phase one was just the beginning, that there was extra things we wanted to get out of the platform. Yeah. And as I said, coming out of the first phase of the project is that things were just really tight, and we needed more resource on our side to run those projects efficiently and effectively. Mm-hmm. So we started to build out our team to bring in people with experience in HCM and within financials to help lead those changes. So whose responsibility is to own the Workday configuration in that area, to understand it, to understand what it's doing for the business, and then to work with the implementation partner as appropriate to get the skills that they bring to the table, but then also to engage with the business. Because what we've done is, since we've gone live, we've had a number of rollouts of extra Workday functionality, which has broadened the footprint of Workday within the company and the functionality that it delivers.
Okay, good stuff. And then the change aspect of it, how fast did you go and how did you find it?
It depended on what we were doing. So after we went live in the summer of 2018, in the second half of the year, there was, I guess, three main things we did. We quickly implemented in the space of 2 months the recruitment module to support our graduate recruitment cycle.
Yeah.
And that was actually the first thing that we did after go live, and was a good justification for moving on to this standard platform. And subsequently, we then did a business assets implementation that had been squeezed out of our launch scope, but we wanted it in place by year end.
Sure.
And that took place in less than a month, enabling us to get rid of another spreadsheet-based process. And the third thing we did is we got used to living with the platform. I think I talked about earlier, from a finance point of view, we focused heavily on getting the transactions into the system. What we then did in the second half of the year was understand how do we get the information out? Does it feed into our monthly reporting? How does it feed into our annual reporting? So the advantage we had of going live at half year, because our financial year follows the calendar, was it gave us the longest window possible before we had to report externally again.
Yeah.
Which is what we then did in the beginning of 2019. We produced our annual reports off the back of the data that was in Workday.
Sure. Okay.
In 2019, the next major project we undertook was the professional services one. So what Workday called PSA, but in our world covered time tracking, absence management, as the two are very closely linked, and then projects and project billing. So we ended up kicking that off towards the end of Q1 in 2019, and the project ended up taking us till the end of the year. But that primary driver was so that we had a sensible cutover point. We wanted to, it made sense for us to go live at a year end. A lot of our, not just our project and client facing reporting, but also our financial reporting is driven off the time data. And what have we spent our time doing? And so it made sense for the finance team to be able to do their 2019 reporting on the legacy time platform, and then for us to go live with the new one in 2020. So that's why the project took us 9 months. I think on reflection, it is something we could have potentially done quicker, but I think it would have, if we hadn't gone live at year end, it would have added in complexity to the cutover.
Yeah.
So just as a general point, we've always been able to coordinate some of the key go lives with those year end reporting, which has its benefits because it makes the cutover simpler, but it has its downsides because some of the time when you need key finance resource, they're diverted elsewhere because they've got external reporting that has to be delivered. But I would say that phase 2 project of bringing in the professional services was where we shifted from Workday being a finance and HR platform to it being a company platform.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we had a new set of stakeholders in the project managers who were running active projects at the time. Some of those projects had been going on for a couple of years as well, so very large scale implementations. And so we needed to support what their requirements were around tracking time, who's doing what, but also billing for that time. And also every employee was suddenly much more of a key stakeholder because we were asking them to do timesheets on a weekly basis, and we were asking them to track their holiday bookings in the system as well. Yeah. So all of a sudden there was a significant uptick in the use of Workday across the company, but also much greater scrutiny on the data that we put into Workday. Yeah. So from a change management point of view, I'd say that was the first project that we ran where change management was a real high profile item on the way that we ran the project. I think we're very fortunate that we have some fantastic tooling within the company, and we have some really good mechanisms for communicating with people beyond just the blanket email to all. So we run quarterly company meetings, which are get-togethers on a regional basis that enable you to give presentations to people, but also to socialize and speak to people face to face. So that was one avenue that we had in order to communicate. We could either send out a video to one of the other locations, or we could do face-to-face presentations. Also, we have a very good intranet that enables us to publish information and publish announcements, but also get input in as well, so we can get feedback via that. People can ask questions, and we fortunately had invested quite heavily in Zoom within our infrastructure, which now is paying dividends from the whole remote working, but at the time was really useful in terms of having informal questioning using specific dedicated channels as well. You could get that very much light touch support process done via a Zoom channel, where someone has a very simple question and then you can respond to it straight away. No need to raise a ticket or to join a queue. Yeah, it was something that was very high profile on us around change management, something that we are now kind of quite high on the agenda of any project that we run.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. So you said about the team makeup that you had someone focused around reporting and security, you had someone focused on HCM and someone focused on financials to drive those projects. Yeah. How have you found in this new world order managing those resources remotely?
Personally, I do miss the face-to-face interaction. And that's for the small things. There's lots of things that we do as a team and with our stakeholders where you would solve it by a 5-minute conversation or even a 30-second conversation. We look at this on my screen. Generally, things via Zoom have become very transactional because you contact someone because you need something from them. So maybe I'm slightly old school, but that I find that frustrating. But as I said, the move from office-based working to remote working was an incredibly smooth one. One, because of our investment in Zoom. Two, because of our investment in Workday. The finance team, other than a few satellite systems that are on a local install, their core platform was just available as much at home as it is when they're in the office. Every employee has a laptop, so it was a fairly seamless transition. The thought of what we would have done if it had struck 2 years earlier, just as before we were on Workday, is just unthinkable. It would have been very, very painful.
Yeah.
In terms of running projects, though, we've managed to run projects. I think there's now it's kind of leveled the playing field, I would say. And what do I mean by that? I said at the outset, I said we were quite heavily London based. That's where our head office was. Yeah. And so if you're running a project across a number of territories, the people from overseas would always be the ones on the video camera. Yeah. And then you'd have the conversation in the room. Now everyone's on the video camera. So there's that level of kind of equalization across everyone. Everyone's at the same level of stakeholder in the conversation.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think we've moved fairly seamlessly across to these projects and continuing to do that. And I think like a lot of companies, we're assessing what this will mean when things start to change again, and how will we focus? How will we work going forwards? And I think remote working and the tools we need and the way that we do that will be a part of what we do.
Yeah, nice. So I'll just go into a little bit of detail about us. So I think it's really brought the team back together. I totally agree with you in terms of missing, or when we were working remote, we're now back in the office. We've got a COVID secure space, so we're lucky we can spread out. And just that human interaction and that camaraderie, I think the relationships are actually better now in the post kind of remote era than they were before, because people are kind of valuing that one-to-one contact, being able to have a meeting, being able to shout across the desk, and just that kind of team feeling. So our office is actually, the environment is a lot better than it was before the pandemic hit, just because people are valuing being around each other again and having that kind of that face time, which we've craved so much through the summer months. So yeah, interesting times, but it's great to be back in the office for us.
And I think it varies by individual. It varies by person and person, what their personal situation is, and whether they want to be more based remotely or more based in the office, and what their role is. I mean, I talked about missing those small interactions, but on the flip side, what we've benefited from is that occasionally we'd want to have a broader team meeting, and so you'd have 20 people and you'd troop down to a meeting room, and then you'd have to wait for some people to join, and then someone wouldn't know which floor it was on. Whereas now, if we want a half-hour chat amongst 20 people and we need to bring in people from the US, we're so much better equipped to do it. And so that kind of ability to communicate with a broader group of people and bring people in has improved, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so on to the final topic, the power of more than one. So, Andy, tell us a bit more about your current systems landscape and then we'll talk about kind of how it's evolving.
Well, yeah, I think that's the key word, is it's evolving. I think if we go back to 2017, we would look at the landscape we had and we could draw it out in a picture, and there'd be lots of boxes and lots of dotted lines and be a bit of spaghetti in there as well. And we've attacked that piecemeal. Obviously, we've brought in Workday in a number of key areas, but there are and there always will be other systems in play, which I guess is where the phrase power of more than one, and it's just acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I think previously with our old systems, a lot of them were point solutions, so they might be desktop based. And so interacting between that system and other systems was very challenging. Getting any kind of integration usually involved some form of manual manipulation, a download of a file, an upload of a file somewhere. What Workday has brought to the table is the ability to actually integrate properly, to have systems talking point to point. And so I think where we're at the moment is that we've brought a lot of the key operational transactions onto the system, both finance, HCR, and across our projects. A lot of those whole transactions are run through Workday. But we also have the capability now to, if there is an area of the business that is running their own system, that we can talk directly to that system. And that's, I guess, one area of growth that I see, is that we now have that capability. It is something that Workday brings to the table. So we've implemented a new reward platform that it contains a number of policies and communication tools with it, discount vouchers. And so that obviously needs to know who our employees are. And so we've been able to set up an integration that just feeds them through from Workday directly. A number of the other projects that we've got on our roadmap are on the premise that the final system that we're looking to implement in that business area may or may not be Workday, but the more important thing is that we can get the data flowing through. So a lot of the conversations use that word these days. What are the data flows that we've got in the organization? How are things moving through? On the Workday side of things, we're looking at planning, so that's adaptive planning, as the next significant piece in the jigsaw, and that brings another part of the flows into the same system. So we have very, very sound models at the moment that are very well understood, but again, it's the restrictions that are placed on us, because a lot of that data is mastered in a spreadsheet and we can't pull it in, it's very difficult for us to build other processes around it if you're having to go and find the right version of a spreadsheet. So bring those things onto the core platform is kind of key to us. So from a Workday point of view, or generally from a more broader infrastructure point of view, we are continuing to look at areas, and as we see fit, we will either roll out a new module in Workday or we'll bring in a new system, but we'll ensure that we're doing it in a way that adds to the greater whole of what we've got, which gives us the ability to provide and drill into the data that we've got in the organization efficiently.
Tell us a bit more about the sort of decision-making process around when to bolt on to Workday, so effectively have an integration, and when to actually add to the functionality of the platform.
So
module or building out Workday.
Yeah, I guess it's looking at what are you trying to achieve from that project, and then weighing that up against the various functionality from the different providers. The reward one, we were looking for something very specific in that space that was very much focused on the end employee and the way to engage with them. And the platform we found suited us specifically in that area and ticked all the boxes. And so that was the key driver. But then there's other areas where, I mean, planning is a good one, where Adaptive, even before it was bought by Workday, was certainly one of the leaders in that space. And so we were looking at the functionality there. Can it satisfy the requirements that we've got around forecasting? And that's the process we're going through now. So I would say that we're always asking the question is, could this go onto Workday? But not necessarily making that the default answer that this will go onto Workday. So just trying to make a balanced decision every time that we address a system or looking at an area in the business.
Okay, good. And looking forward then, obviously going to your crystal ball, what's coming next? So what's coming next in terms of levels of automation, the technology landscape for your organisation, and also what do you think will be the next big thing?
So it's easier to see, obviously, slightly closer to me. And so looking at what we're doing, as I said, it's building out our Workday platform. So planning is a key part of that, but certainly in the HCM space, the offering there that Workday has is huge. And so as the HR team expands and we're bringing in specialists in that area, we're able to take more advantage of what Workday has to offer to give a broader, I would say, employee experience. So on the HCM side, it's looking at the career path for an individual. What's that look both in terms of progression through the organization, but also the skills to support that and how they're gaining those skills and how they're delivering on their role as well. And then on the financial side, we're kind of reaching a level of stability and knowledge about what we've got available in the organization. So one thing that we've done within the last year is bolster the FP&A function within the company, which is giving people the time and space to actually delve into what we've got available within Workday and then present that on a regular cadence to the senior management within the organization. But all of that has been predicated based on us having put these firm foundations in the first place. So taking greater advantage, I would say, of what we've got. And I see that taking greater advantage coming in two ways. The first is the one I've just alluded to, which is around being able to expose the data that we've got available to us in the system, be that through dedicated reporting or through self-service. And Workday has the suite of tools from custom reports to worksheets and slides, discovery boards, dashboards. And it's just making sure that we use the right tool for the right job and not just use something for the sake of it because it's there. So I would say that, that's one key side of it. And then the other is the point we talked about earlier on the landscape, which is around the integrations and making sure that if at all possible, we're removing any kind of swivel chair technology sat in the middle between Workday and whatever other system it is, and having Workday capable of talking to other platforms. And I think that's where we'll get true advantage from it. So I think those are the two main general themes that are driving through the work that we've got in front of us, not just next year, but in the years beyond that as well.
That's good stuff. So lessons learned, obviously you've been on quite a journey by the time that you've articulated that really well. What would you do differently if you had your time again, Andy?
Being honest, other than just a bit more breathing space on the resource side and having the right number of people on the project, I wouldn't say there was a huge amount that we would necessarily do differently, but there's a few things we've learned. I mean, common to any major change project, you want to gain buy-in at the outset, at all levels as well. So employees, people within the finance function who are going to be heavy users of the system, but all the way up to the executive as well. And within that, you need to ensure that you've got a clear view of when you're going to get your benefits or what your roadmap looks like. So I touched on this earlier that in the first phase of the project, we had a fairly clear view of what that was going to deliver, and that what we knew what we would then get in subsequent phases of the project, rather than trying to shoot for everything in one go, because that will take longer and the business will change during that time. And so what I would say now is what we've ended up delivering 3 years down the line is slightly different to what we would have done if we tried to do everything at the outset. So we've benefited from doing projects. None of our projects has lasted more than a year. So it's always been given us that opportunity to, if we need to pivot or change priorities, it's given us those breakpoints at which we can do that.
Yeah.
Then I'd say what you need is the point you asked earlier about resources. What we had to learn, I think, was how to live with an ERP system in finance and HR. We'd never had something with effectively that powerful before, and with that breadth of data. And what you couldn't expect is to go out and recruit an HR partner and assume that they would have the full system knowledge to configure and support Workday. You do need people with specialist skills, and the same on the finance side. Is you want your finance managers to become expert users of the system, but in order for them to be able to do that, you need someone who understands the underlying configuration to support that. So that was something that we learned, and something that we've addressed. And then the other way to take true advantage of the platform, I would say, is to focus on the modeling about how you're reflecting your organization, your processes, your data, your people in the system. And one of the things that I return to quite often is that the more closely what you put into Workday reflects what's going on in real life, the better things work. It makes more sense. So in terms of company structures, the process flows that you do, the way that we model our projects, the organization structures that we put our people into, the more closely that they're aligned to what's going on in the real world, the more smoothly things flow.
Okay, good stuff. Excellent. So what sort of advice would you give to new customers that are rolling out Workday, especially in relation to the launch methodology, which you kind of described, kind of how you did it and how it was successful? Because that's something that's talked about a lot. We see a lot out there on socials. I think we put some content around launch recently. So what would your advice be?
I mean, launch worked for us. I think it worked for us for a number of reasons. One, we went into it with eyes open. We knew that what we wanted was standardization and almost a cookie cutter approach to our finance and HR processes. That's what we're after. And we knew that the big wins would come down the line once we'd built on that foundation. And also, I think we were fortunate that we had the mix of skills on the team to run an implementation project with fairly limited resources.
Okay.
I think where launch becomes challenging is if there are things that you do as an organization that you see as your key differentiators that are different to a standard finance or HR function. It's going to add to that complexity. And I think the other thing that can make shorter timescales implementations more challenging is around the number of integrations. I've said that that's something that we're going to focus on going forwards, because we now have that capability. But what it actually meant is that when we implemented the first time, we didn't have a huge number of integrations to deliver.
Yeah.
We were moving from a world where we had these data silos in finance and in buckets within HR. So actually just lifting those out and replacing them with Workday wasn't as complicated as it could have been if that solution had to then talk to a number of other systems. Because I think that's where you can get fairly significant complexity, even on a smaller sized engagement.
Okay, good, very succinct and nicely rounded off. So I think that's us done. So I want to thank you very much for your time and energy and sharing all that knowledge that you've got, Workday launch and the Workday journey, Andy. So thank you for your time. I hope everybody enjoyed that insight into the Workday journey of Alpha Financial Software.
Thanks, Joe.
No problem. Cheers, Andy. Take care.